Yes, that's
Yes.
right.
So there have been meetings.
Yes,
that's right.
Correct.
That's right. Thank you. So would you like to just explain how we got to this point? And Kirsten Moran is also here as our General Counsel if we need.
So was it Kirsten Moran or Kirsten Woodward?
Let's start with Kirsten Woodward, I think, Lord Mayor.
Right,
because Kirsten had the meeting.
Okay.
Thank you, Lord Mayor, through you. Yes, we have met with the Feminist Legal Clinic on a number of occasions throughout 2021 and 2020, and there's been a number of pieces of correspondence with them as well. At those meetings, we did outline our concerns with some of the material that was on the website, and we were non-specific about particular items. That's true. We did give general overview of the sorts of material that we thought might be problematic, and ask that the Feminist Legal Clinic review the material that was on their website and the material that they were posting. In terms of the process, we followed the due process for accommodation grants program, where assessments are made by the accommodation grant tenant and then by city staff on that application, or rather review. And in 2020 or 1920, the review was rated a B, and this year is rated C, and that's a recommendation we have put to you, councillors.
So, Lord Mayor, if I could just say, I mean, the process obviously provides time, because obviously we'd like to recover relationships if possible. It provides time for us to go back and say, look, this isn't going the way we would have hoped, and that's why those meetings and that correspondence occurred. And so it's not like it just is there's been a time through this time taken to get to this point.
So there have been a number of discussions between council officers like Kirsten and representatives of the Feminist Legal Centre to arrive at this recommendation. And I might just ask Kirsten Moran to also comment.
Yes, through you, Lord Mayor. Through that process, we've been reviewing and making sure that due process has been followed and applied to this decision-making process. So essentially the Feminist Legal Clinic have been assessed against their grant criteria. In the first review they were assessed as not meeting, and we've worked with them to try to improve that, but they're still not assessed as being not satisfactorily meeting those criteria at this point in time.
So what would they have to do to satisfactorily meet the criteria?
That's been the subject of discussion with the Feminist Legal Clinic over the past 12 months. Kirsten Woodward is probably the best place to address the specifics of that, but it's essentially around meeting several licence conditions and compliance with the city's ethics frameworks.
So, Kirsten Woodward, could you make any further comments on that?
Thank you.
Trying to come at a solution here, could you just tell us what would be needed to do that?
Thank you, Lord Mayor, through you. I think Kirsten Moran has outlined the situation well. There are rather a number of concerns associated with the licence agreement, which we have put to the Feminist Legal Clinic, and there would need to be significant changes to their website, to events and activities that are promoted, and other activities of the Feminist that happen outside of the accommodation grants tenancy through that tenancy.
Okay, so thank you. Deputy Lord Mayor.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I have a question for, I think, the Director of the Feminist Legal Clinic, Anna Kerr. I'm looking at your website, Ms Kerr, and I see that you note, and I think this goes to the licence agreement. It says here that you share premises and work in close collaboration with the Women's Human Rights Campaign. Is that something that has been approved through your licence agreement with the city to have a subtenant or a fellow tenant who's also using city space that is not the Feminist Legal Clinic?
It is the Feminist Legal Clinic in that Women's Human Rights Campaign. We're the country contact for the Women's Human Rights Campaign. Can you hear me okay?
No, I think we lost you
Hello?
a bit there at the beginning, Anna.
So I'm actually the Australian country contact for the International Women's Human Rights Campaign, and we have registered Women's Human Rights Campaign as a business name. I mean, the Women's Human Rights Campaign is a, so it's not a separate organisation. It doesn't exist as a legal entity separate from ourselves, but I mean, what it is a collection of volunteer women from around the globe.
You're
So,
breaking up,
I mean,
Anna.
it's they don't make any, can you hear me better now?
It's breaking up a bit. I'm not sure what you need to do.
I've stopped the video, so that might help the audio, Lord Mayor.
Okay.
Yes, so I'm saying it's Women's Human Rights Campaign is an international group of volunteer women who are campaigning for sex-based rights. So they don't make any substantive use of the premises as such. We are the Australian Feminist Legal Clinic is the Australian country contact for the Women's Human Rights Campaign, and we actually have registered that as a business name. So they don't exist as a separate legal entity from Feminist Legal Clinic.
But it's a separate, you say it has a separate ABN, so it's a separate business.
It doesn't have a separate ABN.
It's okay. So it is. So when you say we share premises with the Women's Human Rights Campaign, you're saying that the Australian Women's Human Rights Campaign and the Feminist Legal Centre are the same entity.
I didn't realise I'd worded it like that. I guess I was just trying to, if people at that point, I think there is now a separate website that I've set up for Women's Human Rights Campaign. But I guess at one stage I was, if people were trying to find the Women's Human Rights Campaign, I was trying to alert them to the fact that they could find them through me, through Feminist Legal Clinic. So I'm very happy to change the wording of that if that's causing a concern, because there's a separate website for the Women's Human Rights Campaign, and that doesn't need to be there if that's causing concern.
It's my understanding that if there is a separate entity or there's a, that's what seems to be indicated here by the way you phrased it on your website, that the Women's Human Rights Campaign are also sharing city premises. And I imagine that is not in line with the licence that the city's offered or provided you in order to use that space. But I would be
Let's say it's not a separate entity. So in terms of asking for permission, there's no separate legal entity involved. It's just that people can contact the Women's Human Rights Campaign. So I'm happy to amend that. That's the wording is maybe misleading, but a lot of people are not going to know that Feminist Legal Clinic is the country contact for the Women's Human Rights Campaign. So that's all. But I'm happy to take down reference to that if that's causing concern to council. But in practice, it doesn't mean that there's anything different happening, because we do that as part of our work. We see that as part of our remit to be doing things which advance women's human rights. So it falls within Feminist Legal Clinic.
So I guess the matter for us as a council is that we do have a very inclusive policy. I personally, as a full member of Parliament and as Lord Mayor, have been a very strong supporter of the trans community for a very long time. I think have been very discriminated against and very disadvantaged. And we've certainly made it very well known that they're part of our community and as are many other groups and identities, and that's something we pride ourselves on. And so when our staff recommend to us that we shouldn't be continuing to have an organisation in a subsidised property of ours because they don't share those values that the city has and holds quite strongly. That is why we have reached this situation in relation to you, and why I've supported this recommendation, and I believe why the Deputy Lord Mayor has seconded it.
I don't think that it's the case that we don't share non-discriminatory attitudes. I mean, I think that we very strongly support non-discriminatory approach to everything, and that we very strongly support gender non-conforming behaviour, like as feminists always have. I think there's a misunderstanding that the idea that we believe that there is such a thing as biological sex means that we are somehow at odds with people who are questioning gender roles, because feminists have always questioned gender roles and we embrace gender non-conformity. I think it's confusing to people perhaps, but I think that gender is a social construct and sex is a biological reality. And if you confuse those two concepts, you end up with injustices in a number of areas. And we're seeing this play out in a number of ways. And I don't think we are at odds with the values of the City of Sydney. I think that confusion has arisen because of that confusion of two concepts.
Well, for me, it's very clear that trans people are very welcome and supported and are part of our community, and that's part of our values. So that's really the beginning and the end of it for us. And that's probably the reason why we're taking the position we have, is to accept the advice that we're being given by our staff, who have sought to reconcile your role, because we obviously wanted to support your role, supporting feminists. Clearly we support feminists too. In fact, many of us would be described as feminists, but we also have a very inclusive non-discriminatory policy at this council, and that very much includes trans people.
Well, we're concerned that it's actually excluding gender critical feminists, because there is no organisation that I'm aware of where gender critical feminists can actually discuss these issues. Whereas there are other services that have a home with the City of Sydney where trans rights are being promoted and protected. Gender critical feminists, anyone who questions this, for instance, detransitioners, there is no other community legal service that I'm aware of that will assist these people. And they are becoming the most marginalised group I can think of, because they've lost their group twice.
Deputy Lord Mayor, do you wish to make a contribution?
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I mean, this is obviously a very challenging conversation, because I think there are differing definitions of feminism at play here. And I think one of the challenges that we have is, I think, can be summarised by something that James Baldwin said, which is, we can disagree and still love each other unless your disagreement is rooted in my oppression and the denial of my humanity and my right to exist. And essentially, there is a difference between supporting women's sex-based rights, if that's the term, and disavowing that women, that trans women are women. And I think when we talk about an inclusive approach in the city's ethics framework and in our values, we come from the perspective that trans women are women. And I think that's where the fundamental disagreement lies. And when I look at your website, and when I look at the website of the Feminist Legal Centre, I find it quite distressing to find 67 pages of articles and posts under the tag transgenderism that are highly critical of trans people and trans activism. And I think when I look at it in that context and I see the City of Sydney logo on that website, I think there is a disconnect between that idea, those ideas that are being supported, and the work that the city supports. And so I can understand how staff have sought to ensure that 100% subsidised accommodation that's being provided by the City of Sydney through one of our in high demand public assets, one of our spaces, to make sure that that space is utilised by an organisation that aligns with our values and our need to provide non-discriminatory services to our entire community. So I think there is a real conflict here, and I appreciate this is difficult, but I think it's important that we make sure that public assets that we purport to manage in line with our values are managed in line with our values.
Would any other councillors like to make a contribution? Councillor Pathukas.
Lord Mayor, thank you very much. And I'd like to just thank Deputy Lord Mayor Scully for putting that in words that I was struggling to also put them in some context in terms of, I'm quite a bit older than our Deputy Lord Mayor and grew up in a different time and have views myself which are also impacted by my cultural background and how women are viewed. And, it's never been easy. I can't say that, but I thank you very much. I'm going to say Jess, because there were words there of wisdom beyond your years, so thank you for that. And I would also like to just say to the Feminist Legal Clinic, this is indeed a very, very tough situation that many of us have been put in. And I'll note that if you look around at most of the councillors right now, we are at a loss in terms of its values and principles of not just what we are entrusted with making a decision about on behalf of the entire community. And I would just say that we have to say the entire community and how that plays out for all of us and how we are all seen to back up those values and principles. And healthy debate is always going to be very healthy, and it's why we should be able to question different views. Otherwise we don't learn. But thank you, Deputy Lord Mayor. I also uphold the city's decision.
Do I have any other contributions? Well, then I'd like to thank our speakers for participating.
May I say something? Sorry. May I point out that there has been no evidence of any discrimination, and if there were evidence of discrimination, that should be presented to the Anti-Discrimination Board or to the Human Rights Commission, and I think we would be, very happy to well, not happy, I suppose, but we're very willing to take part in any discussion. But there has been no evidence of discrimination presented here.
I think the Deputy Lord Mayor has just said that there are 67 pages on your website that are where you are critical of trans people.
But that's not true. I mean, they're all published articles from elsewhere. None of it's original content from us, and it's just a news digest of news articles. So it's being posted because it's in the public interest for people to know what's happening. So, for instance, information about the Keira Bell case in the United Kingdom, or, J.K. Rowling, or any of some scientific papers on this sort of thing. There's a debate taking place globally, but the Australian media is not covering it. And I think it's a problem to conflate trans people with a certain type of activism, because there's a lot of trans people who don't agree with some of this. And it concerns me that they're being treated as they're one and the same thing. So because we are criticising a certain activism, that's being interpreted as criticism of all trans people, but that's not what's taking place.
Okay, do I have any other contributions?
Could I just say again, if we were to be given evidence of discrimination...
when you present to council, we usually invite speakers to speak once, and then it's up to councillors to have the discussion. I'm sorry, Helen.
No, I'm very sorry. I'm sorry. I noticed that you talked through the mayor, and I should have followed that protocol myself.
So, well, no, councillors speak through the mayor or the chair because they're part of the council. We invite our speakers in to address us on an issue that is a concern to them, and we have certainly enabled you to do that today. So we've got a recommendation before us. Councillor Chung.
Could I? Oh no, sorry, Councillor Chung, please.
I saw Councillor Chung first. Councillor Chung.
Thank you. So are we able to just ask some questions about the report generally, not just the Feminist Legal Clinic?
Yes, you are.
Yeah. I wonder if I can just ask the staff about some of the criteria for giving these grants, some of the specific criteria, and whether or not recipients of grants, whether or not they are accommodation grants, or whether or not they're grants for cash or in-kind grants, whether or not they're prohibited from using those resources to campaign or support particular councillors or council groups. Is that a particular prohibition as part of their grant?
CEO, I guess you'd probably be the best person to answer
I'm
that.
just trying to think. So, Emma, look, I think we have to pull out the criteria and Emma, do you know off the top of your head? I mean, I think there's definitely you can't use venues for
explicitly
political activities. Emma, remind me.
Yeah, look,
Through the Lord Mayor.
Yes, through you, Lord Mayor. Look, our ethics framework is quite specific. I have it here in front of me, and I don't know whether you'd like me to read this out, but it does outline what the city would not support in terms of activities or entities that align with those ethics listed here. If you'd like me to read those out.
Is that very long, Emma?
There's about 10 points.
Okay, so read them out.
So we say the city would not support any activities or entities that unnecessarily pollute land, air or water, destroy or waste non-recurring resources, market, promote or advertise products or services in a misleading or deceitful manner, produce, promote or distribute products or services likely to be harmful to the community, acquire land or commodities primarily for speculative gain, create, encourage or perpetuate militarism or engage in the manufacture of armaments, entice people into financial overcommitment, exploit people through the payment of below award wages or poor working conditions, and finally, unlawfully discriminate or encourage unlawful discriminatory behaviour, including discrimination on the basis of race, religion or sex in employment, marketing or advertising practices, contribute to the inhibition of human rights generally.
Thank you. So,
Lord Mayor, can I ask another question?
Councillor Chung.
It does surprise me that I don't hear in there, although there's a requirement, for instance, and councillors have recently been contacted by the Electoral Commission that we can't use our council resources for campaigning. It does surprise me that there's no prohibition on a grant recipient using the grant or applying the benefit of that grant to campaigning or supporting a particular councillor. Is there any, apart from the ethics framework, is there any legal reason to prevent a grant recipient from then using those resources to campaign for a particular councillor?
So I'm just trying to think. So, I mean, definitely if someone applied for accommodation grant to set up a campaign office, they obviously would not get it, right? There is definitely, because the other objectives for the accommodation grants, like other grants, are to meet particular social or environmental or cultural objectives. Right. So, we might say, now I don't have the criteria in front of me, but, organisations that, that employ artists and activate the city. So the criteria of, that's the ethics framework, but then the different categories say things like that. And I'm pretty sure we don't have one that says that you can apply for a grant, whether that's accommodation or money, if you're basically using it for your political campaign. So a political party wouldn't fit the criteria, right? So, and I know
it's covered by the Local Government Act too, in terms of
So, but I think Councillor Chung's points are important, and I was speaking to Emma during the break about the need to refresh the grants policy and program and criteria, because, things change and things need to be more explicit, and, the world changes and priorities change. So we're definitely working on all of that so that we can have a very robust discussion with the new incoming council about what that should look like. But I do know from memory, though, that, you can't book a venue to host a political event unless you pay the full amount.
Sorry, Lord Mayor. So I just wonder if councillors would consider thinking about this, because in this important year of the local government elections, it's no use waiting until after the election to refresh this aspect of it. And I would imagine that most councillors would support the idea that you cannot use the resources of a grant to support a particular council candidate. It seems to me to be completely against the spirit of how we distribute funds and how public funds are used. I wonder if it would be, and if councillors agreed with that, whether we should then request that the CEO write to grant recipients, reminding them that the resources that they receive from council are not to be used for campaigning for individual councillors or council candidates.
So I think and let's turn our minds to this. I think that the if somebody got a grant, they got a quick response grant for $2,000 and then they spent that money campaigning, that would be a breach. But if someone is a grant recipient but then they choose to do campaigning for different parties or whatever, then that's a different matter, and that's you've still got the right as a citizen to do the things that you want to do. But you can't use the money or the office for it. No. That's right. And that's clear. But you're right to ask, is it clear to third party people? It's clear to councillors, it's clear to staff, but is it clear to others that, if they were to then take that money and use it, that would be not acceptable?
I think the Lord Mayor's made a point there, that you can't use those resources, particularly in this particular case where there are accommodation grants. So the occupation of those premises are itself the grant, and so any of the business that you operate from that building is subject to the grant. Therefore, you can't be campaigning, that organisation who occupies that premises as a grant of council can't be campaigning for a particular candidate. But
an organisation, just clarifying, an organisation doesn't campaign, an individual does, right?
Well, no, that's not true. I mean, if something's put out in the name of an organisation, if I can't pick a name out of the air because it'll be, but if you pick any organisation, in their name, they could put out any campaigning to support a particular candidate, and if they're using the resources of council to do that, I mean, any of the organisations named in the accommodation grants, as an organisation, they could put out a campaign, some sort of a communication to campaign for a particular candidate. And if they were using those facilities and resources of those premises, I can't see how anybody could justify that as appropriate. I mean, we know across the city there are many people who will campaign for all different candidates in their own personal capacity, and I endorse that. I think that's important for a healthy democracy. But I think the transparency of grants and grant giving in the City of Sydney is somewhat troublesome if particular organisations are using a particular grant facility to campaign for a particular candidate. I think that is quite troublesome.
So I think we need to take this on notice, Lord Mayor, and I think there's a lot of good suggestions about our grants and criteria, and we'll turn our minds to it and for the relevant to. Thank you, Lord Mayor.
Thank you. So we have a recommendation before us. I'll put that to you. All those in favour say aye. Those against?
Have councillors Vathulkas, Chung against, and Councillor Foster, were you for? Can you just confirm that? So it was carried 6 votes to 2.
Sorry, what was my vote registered? I just had a phone call in the middle of that.
I had you as 4, but I just was double checking.
Yes, thanks.
So carried 6 votes to councillors Vathulkas and Chung voting against.
Right, thank you. So now we're going to go to Transport, Heritage and Planning. Councillor Thallis.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Rather different to the last discussion.